After I recorded my video about Natalie Godberg's Writing Down the Bones, I remembered that last year I'd written a blog post about one of the experiences I'd had with the book. And I want to read that post here and expand on it a little bit because I do think it's relevant to what goes on in this channel. So in the book, there's a section where she talks about the obsessions that writers have and how that fuels their work. And I thought about it and I realized that I've got 4 big obsessions of my own that fuels my work. 2 of these things are questions. One of them is a concept, and one of them is a thing, sort of, kind of. And in the process of figuring out what those things were, I made a few discoveries about each of them. The first of them, which is a question, is the question, what do I really want? And those who know me from my blogging or from other stuff that I've done, they know that this is a question that comes back to me constantly. Because I think, what do I really want, is the toughest and most important question any of us could ever ask ourselves. And it's not, what do I think I want? It's not, what do I tell myself I want? Or what does everyone else think I want? But what do I really and truly want when no one, not even me, is looking? And this question lay at the bottom of the deep-seated turning of things in me that sparked off all the writing I eventually put out under the Infinimata label. I had writing that was put out before that under a different label, but I'm not as happy about it. And I discovered that once I stopped kidding myself, once I stopped lying to myself and trying to tell myself what I wanted, once I let what I really wanted come to the surface and let that come in as easy as letting in the morning sun by opening the shades, it became orders of magnitude easier for me to write. And not just to write, but to finish them, to get them done, to learn from them, and to move past them. And I think you can see how this constituted an obsession for me in my real life. It's also filtered into my work as a subject. I would be shocked if it hadn't. Most of the characters at the center of my stories, they only reach anything like grace or understanding when they swap their false ambitions for true self-understandings, when they have their delusions about themselves demolished to make room for what's really in there. So the second obsession is another question, and it comes in the form, how are we really going to live? And this obsession became clear to me after I'd written several books that, in retrospect, felt like they were about a common theme, the end of one way of life and the beginning of another, and the people who are forced to leap across the chasm between those two things. Some of my very favorite books of all time are about this concern, and I want to make a separate video about a number of them, but I will save that for later. So this whole question of how are we really going to live, this is the question these people are asking themselves as they leap across this chasm to the other side. And they do this to give themselves some better sense of how to land and what might be waiting for them on the other side. Anything I've revisited that many times in my work, and which entices me to revisit it again in the future in who knows how many other guises, that qualifies as an obsession. See, what matters most for me is not the exact ideas about how to live, but the way people embody those ideas, the way they live out the struggles between those ideas through their own struggles amongst themselves. The job is not to prove any one of them most right. That is the job of telling the story. Although I will always have sympathies for one party or another, and I must be honest about that. The real job when writing a story about these things is to show how the struggle is as eternal and fitful as it is for them, as it is for any of all of us. It never ends, and it probably never will. And to the extent that it could ever come to a conclusion, it would mean that we would no longer be the human beings that we know to be. The third obsession is a term that I came across in the Japanese language. The word is seimeikan. And this may be the most difficult of the bunch to discuss. It's also the most overarching and important. The term seimeikan means something like a view of life, a sense of life, a worldview, something in that neighborhood of sentiments. And I first ran across it while reading this wonderful interview with the filmmaker Kei Fujiawara, which I will link in the description for the video. And she was talking about the seimeikan for a creator like Osamu Tezuka, the so-called god of manga, or the writer Kenji Miyazawa. And she talked about how their seimeikan is just so much higher and larger than other people's. So seimeikan is how someone sees the world, but the impression I get is it also includes everything that their worldview implies, how their vision of a world constitutes a program of action, even if it's a utopian one, and how that couldn't be swapped with anybody else's seimeikan over any number of lifetimes. So maybe a better way to put it would be something like how what we believe becomes incarnated in what we are by way of what we do. And I find myself obsessed with this concept through my writing because I cannot bring a character into a story without some sense of their worldview, without some sense of how they see things and how the way they see things is embodied in everything they are. I have to know what it is about the way they can't help but see the world as theirs. I have to know this. So for me, there has to be some sense of seimeikan for all the characters, this sense of what do I really want that lives down inside of them, and not always in places they know about. And that moves them to do things. It moves them to try and get closer to the ideas expressed in obsession number 2. How should we really live? Both of these things are animated by a living worldview. It's something that almost constitutes a character unto himself. We speak of Mr. Spock, but we also speak of someone being Spock-like. We could call someone a Scrooge, and it's generally understood what we mean by that. That's their seimeikan. The last note I want to make about seimeikan is that no one's seimeikan is static. It does change over time, but it always seems to be pointed in some specific direction or another. A man with a lifelong utopian ideal may start by trying to bring about revolution and find that just cleaning up the neighborhood swamp and making it into a garden may be the most revolutionary thing he's ever done. Seimeikan may become more refined or pointed, it may broaden, it may become more diffused, but there is never any question that at every moment it is shaping one's vision and one's action. And the fourth obsession is the image. Because if I hadn't been a writer, I probably would have been a filmmaker or a cartoonist or a graphic novelist or something in that vein. My life was such that it was just easier for me to be a writer. It was far less disruptive. And I made up for it in part by being a lifelong movie buff, a lifelong photography buff, and a fan of comic art. And also by realizing how image-driven and psychedelic in some ways so much of my writing actually is. Because 9 times out of 10, when I sit down to start a story, it starts from an image. It starts because I saw an image somewhere. Maybe it's an image of a person, and I asked myself, what is their story? Maybe it's an image of something that already had a story behind it, but I didn't know what the story was, so I made one up, and I became fascinated with that. But the image speaks for itself in one way or another. It's going to tell me its story, and my job is to listen, and then to ask questions that show I'd been listening and develop those into the story. I've also found that it's really hard for me to work without images just at hand. I collect art books, I collect photo books, I save random images that I find off the internet and clip art libraries. I'm always prowling around for that one picture that seems to be saying to me, once upon a time. I can't help myself there. Ingmar Bergman once said that the one great subject of the cinema is the human face, because everything is there. A single good picture, a single interesting face, that can give me 100,000 words all by itself. Sometimes a concept for a book will have nothing but that, a concept. And I also know that without a person, a face, an image to go with it, I don't really have anything. And so the book languishes until a face shows up at my door, and then boom, I'm off and running. And I also know that if any of these obsessions wane or lose their power or seem to be misdirecting me, I suspect I'm going to take another career. So those are the 4 big obsessions that drive my work. I hope that was interesting to you. And I'm curious to know about your own obsessions. Drop a comment. Let me know what you think. Until next time then, stay curious.